What do I know?
For the time being, the ceasefire remains in place?
What?
For the time being, the ceasefire remains in place?
You know, it's unbelievably weak. I would call it the weakest right now. After reading the piece of garbage they sent us, I didn't even finish reading it. They said, I'm not going to waste my time reading it. I would say it's one of the weakest right now. It's on life support. They understand these are all medical people. Dr. Oz, life support is not a good thing. Do you agree?
Bad prognostic.
I would say the ceasefire is on massive life support, where the doctor walks in and says, sir, your loved one has approximately a 1% chance of living.
That was a clip of President Donald Trump holding yet another of his impromptu news conferences. It happened in the Oval Office on Monday, May 11th. Standing behind him are individuals working in the maternal health sector. But, as always, it's a free-for-all when it comes to questions and President Trump. And the breaking issue on Monday, when this gathering took place, was the very recent rejection by Iran of the American proposal to end the war. On Sunday night, hours before President Trump's response to Iran, I spoke with Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, senior fellow with the FDD and a great friend of State of Tel Aviv and beyond. At about the same time that Jonathan Conricus and I were speaking, Prime Minister Netanyahu left an event at the Dead Sea area in order to take an urgent call with President Trump. In light of the reaction of President Trump to the Iranian position that was made public on Monday, I'm going to go crazy here and speculate that President Trump was giving Bibi a heads up on Sunday night as to what the American reaction would be. That was not yet public, but more importantly, I'm pretty sure that they were also discussing operational responses in the near future, meaning what should the military response to Iranian intransigence be? Mr. Conricus and I do acknowledge Mother's Day, but we get into Iran pretty quickly. That's the focus of this podcast episode. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Sunday, May 10th. It's Mother's Day. Jonathan Conricus, wonderful to see you. Thanks for joining State of Tel Aviv and beyond.
Happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers listening in North America. I'm not sure Israeli mothers are really aware, but North American mothers are probably very aware. And a great opportunity to wish them Happy Mother's Day and thank you.
And thank you. My mother, I have to say, used to call it a Hallmark holiday, and she did have a point, but it's huge now. And yeah, I've gotten, calls and messages from North American friends, and I'm like, it's not even a thing here.
No.
Nobody even talks about it.
We have Mother's Day, we have Family Day, and I think Israeli mothers probably are appreciated a lot in Israeli society, but it's a different date.
I think they are, absolutely,
Yeah.
and especially by their sons, right? I'm the mother of 2 daughters, but I do think every Jewish mother needs a son. And I'm standing by that. I'm going to die on
As
that
the son
hill.
of one, I agree.
So why don't we move on to the topic du jour, the topic of the day that we're going to be discussing, which is Iran. There's so much uncertainty about what is going on and how long is this going to go on. And you've been out and about. I've certainly been paying attention, talking a lot about this. And speaking about the way in which President Trump has managed the situation in Iran or with Iran thus far, you've been presenting it in quite positive terms, in terms of his patience, buying time to manipulate, to bring in additional force. And I think that your take is quite different from many commentators that we hear who say that this is a complete disaster. This is a really ill-advised adventure, and it's just going sideways fast.
Yeah, so, what matters most is how the dust really will settle and how this really will turn out. And I'll take the point, I agree that it has the potential of being a tremendous belly flop. It has the potential of being another Iranian win against a different presidential administration. It has the potential of being another underplanned or misguided American adventure in the Middle East. It has all of that. But what I've been saying positively and what I believe in is that there's great potential for this to be really a defining moment in Middle Eastern history. There's potential for this to become really changing the dynamics of power, a great move for the U.S. in the world and in the region, and hopefully the beginning of the end of the region's biggest bully and destabilizing factor, which is the Iranian regime. But we're not there yet. Neither are we at fiasco, nor are we at a point where we can say, hail Trump, he did this, he managed this just magnificently. But I do have to say on the positive side that for the first time, the shrewd Iranian negotiators, they have met a match, I think, in a person who is willing to out-crazy the crazies, in a person that has a very special ability to command the media and really has the complete understanding, really wrote the book about media dominance and controlling the headlines. And had it not been for those capabilities, and also I think his personal conviction and belief that he will not allow Iran to become a nuclear power, had it not been for these very distinct qualities, I think we would have found ourselves in a very different and bad position many days or perhaps weeks ago already. So the positive side is one where I try to focus on. President Trump has been focused. He has been consistent, continuously telling the Iranians and everybody else listening, you're not going to have nuclear weapons, so you might as well make a deal, cut the deal, and cut your losses. Every day that goes by, there's more losses for Iran. And I think what President Trump is doing cleverly is to, with one eye on the ticker on Bloomberg, watching markets, watching the prices of oil and other key economic indicators, one eye on that, but then another eye on the feed that he's getting from CENTCOM, where they're telling him how bad the Iranians are hurting. And then there's the X factor, which we do not yet know how to quantify, and that is what's the situation inside Iran? How bad is the regime bleeding there in terms of international legitimacy? And how desperate are they to stay in power? And most importantly, when are the Iranians going to rise up against the regime? And out of those three different topics, global markets, which is mostly pressure on the US and on Israel, and the military situation, which is pressure on Iran, we don't know about the third one, and that perhaps is the X factor that is going to be the most influential one. But I think Trump has balanced all of those. And, I've said this before, but I will repeat it. The free publicity, the free media that the Iranian regime is getting in American and Western media, it's just astonishing. How Western media is just repeating and amplifying Iranian talking points. And really, if you're a person who, doesn't have skin in the game, doesn't understand the dynamics of war, and doesn't look beyond headlines and rely in your worldview on what you read in most U.S. and international outlets, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the U.S. is losing, has already lost. It's just a matter of, pronouncing death, and that Iran is going to emerge stronger from this, and that the regime is all powerful, and that things are great for the Islamic Republic. That isn't the case. That is not reality. No matter how much people will try to spin it and explain that is the case, that is simply not reality. So, to summarize, I prefer to look at the positive. I am hopeful and optimistic about this administration, this specific president. And of course, like in every other thing, I can be proven wrong. But I think that what matters is how this eventually settles. And we're not there yet. And I'm hoping and positive that the president will do the right thing, and that this time will be different in terms of the 47 years of open hostilities between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America.
So it's really astonishing. You talk about the way the Western media is, I think it's fawning they just seem to be besotted with this Iranian leadership. And as you say, just parrot whatever they serve up. And it's been that way for a long time. And that's, somebody can write a great PhD on that one day, why they are so eager, most of the Western media, to just buy these lies, hook, line, and sinker. But it's ever thus. It's been that way for a long time. And so, as you and I know, we have to look hard for different, more reliable information sources. The other thing they talk about constantly in the Western media is how brilliant the Iranians are. What brilliant negotiators. Well, not really. It's just that the West has constantly lost its nerve. And that, as you point out, Trump out crazying the crazies, Trump really being a master manipulator of media, really understanding intuitively how it works. He's also not caving. And one of the really important issues on which he's not caving is playing out in the Strait of Hormuz. So
Yeah.
Iran decides, okay, we don't accept that this is an international waterway. It's our waterway. We're going to control all the traffic in and out. And Trump's like, not really. It's not going to work that way. There's a stalemate for a whole bunch of reasons. Traffic's not really moving in and out. There have been some violent acts initiated by the Iranian sort of naval capability, the speedboats that they use, targeting American ships and others. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. So Strait of Hormuz isn't functioning as a gateway for international oil and gas supply, 20% of the world's supply, as it might. But here's what's even more important. Carver Island, we know, which is basically this island that is Iran's economy. It's where they process all the oil and refine it, and the gas loaded onto
No,
tankers.
they don't refine there. That's
Oh,
one thing that the Iranians sorely miss, and that is the ability to really refine oil. Iran actually imports petroleum, for instance, the stuff that you pump at the gas pump, and the Brits refer to as petrol, and in the US it's gas, even though it's liquid, but that's a whole other topic. That is imported into Iran, even though they export crude oil, and they may have some refining capability. Really an expert at this, but I know that they rely on imports for providing petrol or gas to the drivers and for most of the motor vehicles. So they have storage facilities, and it's an offloading facility where they can pump out the oil that they store there in order to export it. That is the strategic importance of Hajj Island.
But we know also that the storage capacity is full, or at least we think
Almost so, yeah. On its way to becoming full. There's ambiguity here, and I think, where mistakes are made, I think we should own up to them. I've seen analysis, 2 weeks ago and more than that we were speaking even at FTD about, that the Iranian regime has 13 days or 2 weeks, and until then they will run out of storage space. I'm seeing reports that they have in some places run out of storage and that they're pumping out into the ocean. I've seen reports that there's giant spills in various locations in Iran. From my perspective, still unconfirmed. But what I think is difficult to argue is that they will eventually, at this pace, run out of storage space, run out of places to pump crude oil to. And that will be a strategic problem for them.
And the other part of that, let's just carry on with this strategic problem, is that when they run out of storage space and the closing of the strait combined, they run out of cash flow. Now, we know that for months, Iran has been relying on the Chinese yuan, which you taught me how to say a few months ago, as well as cryptocurrency to keep its economy chugging along as much as it is, or as little as it is. But what's happened in the last few days is when Iran targeted the UAE with drones, and maybe they were missiles as well, I'm not sure. But they've been targeting the UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait. But the UAE, they keep hitting more and more consistently. What the UAE did finally is they said, you know what, we're freezing all of your assets that flow through our banking system. And that, you and I have wondered for months on these podcasts, when are they going to do this? Why don't they do this? It's a good question.
Yeah.
Apparently they've done it. So the combination of the closing of Hormuz, the overflowing storage or close to overflowing storage capability, and what seems to be a real sort of, strangulation or choke on cash flow into the regime.
Yeah.
That's the real pressure point, and that, I think, is what President Trump seems to be focused on.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I'll add another point to that, which hasn't gotten any significant coverage in international media, but the Tasnim, the official Iranian news agency, obviously under the control of the IRGC and the establishment, they issued a threat, including with a graphic, with a map, where they explained about the next step, what the Iranian regime is threatening to do next with regards to Hormuz. And that is not only the maritime traffic at sea level, but that they're actually looking to disrupt the flow of information in international cables that were planted there in the area of Hormuz, deep underground, basically on the relatively shallow bed of the ocean there, of the sea. And mind you, that area, the Gulf, the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, not very deep. This isn't the Indian Ocean. It's a few hundred meters deep. And what they're saying is that we are going to target, we are going to tax, and we are going to force those who use it. And we're talking about all of the Middle Eastern countries, including Israel. We're talking about major American and international companies. And of course, everything related to banking, commerce, communications, etc. And the Iranians are saying not only are we going to tax it, like they want to tax the Strait of Hormuz, the traffic there, but they're going to force the companies and entities who use it to comply with Iranian law, which of course is absurd. But, you could see either it's, an act of desperation or it's an act of brilliant bullying. I think it's more of the former than the latter. And you can see that the Iranians, in their actions, there's like nothing that they think is beyond, one bridge too far. There's nothing that they cannot or should not do in order to alleviate pressure from themselves. Even thinking about, we are going to tax the flow of bits of information in cables underground, underwater. Bizarre. I haven't heard a single terrorist, even Russians, Chinese, nobody has ever said anything like it. But the Iranians, in their press statements, they make it sound as if it's a very reasonable and legitimate thing for a nation state to do. Of course, again, upending, totally tossing out of the window international law, norms, everything. And yet, if Israel would have said it would do such a thing, rest assured that we would have had massive attention focused on Israel, condemnations and sanctions and whatnot. Iran says, and they show, seriousness in doing so, yet very limited, if any, coverage in international media.
This issue is so important and merits more focus. We are now going to play for you just over 3 minutes of a superb report by an Indian news outlet that explains the issue with visuals really well. This is a portion of a longer report that documents incidents in the North Sea several years ago when undersea cables were cut. As you watch this clip, ask yourselves, why have I not seen or read anything about this in Western media? And hey, I would love to be wrong. I'd love to be corrected. So if you do find anything close to this in terms of quality in Western media, please send me the links. I'd love to see it.
The Iranian media has just put out a chilling warning. And this time, it is not about oil. It is not about tankers. It is about the invisible cables that keep the world running. The cables that carry your emails, your bank transactions, your video calls, and 95% of global internet traffic. I'm talking about undersea cables or submarine cables. The warning came from Tasnim News Agency, an Iranian state-linked outlet. The message was pointed. It says, I'm quoting, simultaneous damage to several major cables could trigger severe outages across the Persian Gulf. The report mapped key undersea cables running through the Strait of Hormuz. It made mentions of several Gulf countries, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, who rely heavily on these maritime cables. The report framed these landing stations as potential pressure points. Now let me explain why this deserves your attention. When you send a message to someone, when you transfer money or stream a video on your phone, where does that data go? It flows underwater through the submarine cables. They are laid under the sea, on the ocean floor. They use fiber optic light signals to carry global data traffic, which is basically transforming information into light and then sending it through cables. These cables work faster than satellites. They connect continents worldwide. And now, someone is talking about cutting them. Let's talk about why this matters beyond West Asia. The Strait of Hormuz, you know it as the world's most critical oil choke point. But it is something else too. It's a digital choke point. It has a dense web of fiber optic cables beneath its waters. They carry an estimated 17 to 30% of regional internet traffic. They power the AI infrastructure hubs of the UAE and Saudi Arabia, the ones backed by tech giants Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. If these cables snap, and I mean if even some of them snap, the damage won't stay in the Gulf. Targeting them may result in a wider conflict, dragging in more countries like the EU, the Gulf states. Stock markets could freeze, banking systems could falter, payment networks could fail. Within minutes, your entire digital life could be disrupted. And this is not theoretical. We've seen this before. Undersea cables have been targeted time and again.
Now, back to the discussion with Jonathan Conricus. Who's running Iran? You sort of offered two possibilities that either they're incredibly shrewd or kind of, desperate. I'm going to go with the desperate/panic theory. Things are not getting easier in Iran. And one of the things that is sort of difficult to figure out is who's running the show. There are many different opinions. I've been trying to keep up with the different theories. Love to hear which one you think is the most likely. Who's running Iran?
So, based on the information that I have available, which is a mix of open source and some intel assessments, judging by their actions, judging by various tweets and odd press statements made by Pezeshkian, the president, judging by the actions of Iran, judging by the communications of the IRGC and the IRGC naval forces, combining all of that together, I think that the strongest and most plausible theory, and will emphasize this is only theory, I don't think that anybody really knows. I'm not entirely sure that the Mossad knows who actually is in charge in Iran. They probably know best of anybody who's outside of Iran. But at this stage, I think it's the most likely is that we have a relatively small group of IRGC generals that are using their separate command structure, their independent logistics, their independent finances, and their independent weapons and command and control structure. And they're simply running Iranian diplomacy, running Iranian military actions, and independently communicating while other parts of the Iranian establishment are kind of trying to catch up with whatever the IRGC is doing next, and then out of a sense or an urge to try to display a picture of unity, they, follow the line. Just like, if we have viewers maybe know rugby, unlike in football, in rugby, right, you take the ball and you start running and your teammates follow you and you can only pass backwards. You can't pass the ball forward. And you rely on the fact that the others will run with you. When you take the ball and start running. So I think what's happening here, IRGC has the ball, they're running, and the others, Pezeshkian, the army, parts of the parliament, and anybody else who has anything to say, they're basically catching up and forming kind of a line. And it'll be interesting to see when and how that breaks. We've already seen differences of opinion between Pezeshkian and the IRGC when it comes to how Iran has attacked its neighbors. That has happened 3 times when Pezeshkian has presented criticism, apologies, explanations that in my mind were quite bizarre, trying to explain Iranian actions and trying to tell their neighbors that actually Iran doesn't want to fight against other Muslims. But then again, then the IRGC fires missiles and fires drones again and again, indicating that they are the ones who are driving policy, not Twitter or X statements by Pezeshkian, and that he isn't the one who is actually maneuvering. One last thing though, Mark Dubovitz from FDD said this a while ago, and I think it's worth mentioning here. We should always be wary about any picture or any kind of a situation, any portrayal of moderates and hardliners in the Iranian establishment, because many times in the past, that has been a ruse that the Iranians have used in order to confuse negotiators, Western naive negotiators. It's worked for them in the past, where the basic calculation was for Westerners, well, if we strengthen the moderates, then the hardliners won't have the dominating hand. And that's, of course, a statement that has been said by many seasoned Western and naive diplomats over the years. And that's exactly what the Iranians want us to believe. So bottom line, I think the most important thing is to look at their actions. Their actions are extreme. Their communications are extreme. What they have been doing, attacking the UAE, attacking a Chinese vessel, attacking a Qatari vessel in Qatari waters just recently today, and the fact that they have even had the audacity to attack American Navy ships. That shows you how extreme they are. And when they say that we are going to take control over and tax international information network, that even goes one way beyond. That's like a little kid who doesn't really have a grasp and understanding of what he's threatening to do, but he sees something that he thinks that he can leverage and threaten, and that is how I interpret what the IRGC is doing.
So, my people who I speak to who are Iran experts, but the Persians, they hate it when Westerners talk about moderates because, for example, Pezeshkian, the president, is, the Western media calls him a moderate all the time. And people I speak with said there's nothing moderate about the guy. Nothing. But yes, it's a very effective kind of, decoy tactic that the Iranians have mastered. So it was just about a week ago when Iran, out of nowhere, things had been reasonably quiet and they started attacking the UAE and attacking hard. And since then, as you've noted, their attacks against neighboring countries have increased and been reasonably consistent, and some pretty audacious moves, as you note, against American vessels. This is all so beyond outrageous, aggressive, pick your word. Does it not strike you, or do you not think that perhaps what the Iranians are doing with this outrageous behavior is almost trying to goad the United States into coming in and attacking and going on the offensive militarily? Because I just don't understand why else they would do that.
Yeah, so to try to explain a little bit, so when the U.S. launched the Economic Freedom Operation, the Iranian response, I think, out of a lack of viable military options, because they are weak and they have a very shallow toolbox and not a lot of good tools in it. So what they said was, when they looked, they scanned the Gulf and they assessed the military situation. They understood pretty correctly that if they attack Israel, Israel would say, thank you very much, here we come, and Israel would strike hard and fast and very painfully. If they attacked anything meaningful American, the U.S. would probably do the same, even though I am a bit surprised by how the president has been kind of down-talking and belittling Iranian aggression. But then they said, okay, what can we do that isn't that or that? Well, what we define, what the Iranians think is the weakest link in the chain here is the UAE, because up until now, the UAE has been at the receiving end of tremendous Iranian aggression. They have the Iranians have fired the majority of their weapons, drones and missiles, not at Israel, not at the Jewish state, but at their neighbor, the United Arab Emirates, a Muslim majority country, which is just amazing that this is what they've done. Up until now, the Emiratis have not retaliated. And, you know, the jungle rule is, if you can hit someone, if you can take someone's lunch and you get away with it without paying any price, then you'll do it again. And that's what the Iranians have learned, that they attack, they bully, and they don't face any consequences. And therefore, when they assess the situation of how can they signal either desperation or dissatisfaction with what's going on, well, one way is to attack the Emirates. And I think the Emirates, they've done, you know, very brave moves diplomatically and economically, pulling out of OPEC, major strategic move, and statements that they've said about how they see Iran, what you mentioned, that they finally froze a lot of Iranian assets, several tens of billions of dollars, reportedly. That is very significant. But so far, the Emiratis have not yet used the air force that they have and other capabilities that they have to actually retaliate against Iran. And that's interesting. And I think that is why the Iranians said, well, you know what, if we're going to fire, let's fire at someone where the likelihood of us getting any retaliatory fire is relatively low. That may change. And I know that I've read reports and I've spoken with friends in the military who are in those circles of regional cooperation. At the end of the day, I think every day that goes by, every Iranian attack that reoccurs is a day where the Emiratis bring themselves closer to summoning the courage and leadership to actually strike back. Even if it won't be a very successful military attack, and even if they'll get consequences for retaliating, my advice to them, as one small country can advise another, it is never a good thing to take a beating and not to fight back. It is never a good sign to your enemy that you're willing to try to contain a situation out of fear of escalating. What that does is that it invites more attacks. And granted, the Emirates, their entire business model is this is a place of safety. This is a place for global commerce, and it's safe for Westerners, for expats from all over the world to live in and prosper in. And as long as they're in line with politics, then everything is just tremendous. I understand that and I get it. But my message to the Emiratis is, the Iranians, they've got your number, and I think that they will continue to attack the Emirates. They will cripple your economy until you push back.
I'm sure you saw that fantastic clip of Secretary of State Rubio the other day in his new job as filling in for Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary.
Yeah.
While she's on maternity leave. There were some really great clips. He was enjoying that kind of, being press secretary thing way too much. But one of them, he said, it's crazy. Like, if your country's attacked, you attack back, right? Like, who wouldn't? We're going to take a quick time out to show you this Marco Rubio clip that is right on point.
If you fire at a U.S. Navy ship, what are we supposed to do? Say, oh, there's a ceasefire. We're not going to shoot down your drone. That's a stupid question. That's a stupid position to take. Of course we fired back at them. They were shooting at us. That's what I would expect to do. Only stupid countries don't shoot back when you're shot at. And we're not a stupid country.
Now, back to our main event, Jonathan Conricus.
I think he was brilliant, by the way. I watched that as someone who, deals a lot in communications, and I've answered a few questions in my time. That was brilliant. That was really a good performance. I was very happy to see Secretary Rubio do that, and I think the content and delivery were A-list, spot on.
I would say A+ even. And it was also very entertaining. So, it was just all in all a good show. But why do you think the UAE isn't responding? Why are they just sitting down and taking this? Are they fearful that the Iranians will have an edge? UAE, I think, has a pretty good air force.
Like so many other Gulf countries, like the Saudis, they themselves, and a few other countries, they have on paper military capabilities, and they've definitely spent a lot of money in acquiring them. But, you could make the case that their air defenses definitely delivered and that they managed to defend their country and their infrastructure and their personnel against the vast majority of incoming ballistic missiles and drones. And that's a great success for them. So that should provide them with the sense of cohesion and self-esteem that they need in order to take it one step further and actually strike back. They have an air force. It is American platformed, advanced third and fourth generation aircraft with American systems, with American missiles. I think there's also some Israeli tech involved as well. But the bottom line is that it's a political decision that needs to be made by the leaders and say, well, we're not going to take it anymore. I would assume that there's still, this type of October 6th thinking in the UAE, where probably they're still making the calculation that it's better to contain, not to escalate the situation, because once we escalate, we don't know how far it can go, which is a valid and responsible way of statecraft. But I think at this stage, the Iranians have really indicated how little they regard the Emiratis and how they are focused on exasperating and distinguishing the Emiratis from all of the other countries in the Gulf and all other Arab countries for that matter. They're really focusing a lot of kinetic energy on the Emirates. And when your enemy does that, it leaves you with very little options but to actually retaliate. And, when you look at the state of Iranian air defenses, pretty exposed. Thank you, Israel and the US. So the Emiratis could, and I've said this on TV, the Emiratis, Kharj Island is not far away. The Emiratis could strike it. They could strike parts of the Iranian infrastructure there and send a message to the Iranians that, you've done this, we've allowed you to get away with it, this is where the buck stops. They have the capability. It's a matter of deciding whether or not to do it. But, if the US and Israel get back at it, militarily speaking, I think that the chances of the Emiratis joining them this time around are relatively high.
And what about the Saudis? They've been a little squirrely the last few weeks. They've been kind of taking some surprising positions. I haven't heard from them in the last few days, but you're probably more on top of it than I am. Where are the Saudis at? What's their position?
Yeah, I agree with you. They've been relatively quiet, taking a comfortable back seat, probably enjoying the fact that the Emiratis are getting punished by the Iranians and not them. Of course, important to keep in mind that there is bad blood and tension between the Saudis and the Emiratis over various topics. And this is a classic case from a Saudi perspective of if we can sit this one out and have someone that we don't like getting into trouble, then why rock the boat? And I think that's what the Saudis are doing. I don't think, based on a lot of reports from a few weeks ago, the Saudis have been pretty clear about where they would envision this conflict to end. They've said, reportedly, according to the Washington Post and others, that Mohammed bin Salman reportedly asked President Trump to go all the way to finish the job and actually get the Iranian regime removed. That has been said. I don't know if that is still the sentiment in the kingdom, but I think they're, strategically and tactically smart and keeping quiet for a while, which probably serves their purposes best. But we should also remember that they are quite exposed and quite vulnerable in terms of, their desalination. They rely some 85% on desalination. All of the water that they consume, their infrastructure is very exposed. And unlike the Emiratis, who have shown very good ability to defend themselves, that's not necessarily the case for the Saudis. So that may be what's guiding them in their current less belligerent or less aggressive strategy.
So pull out your crystal ball and look forward for the next week, few days. What do you think is likely to transpire?
Yeah, there's what I hope happens and then what I think is likely. What I hope is that this goes back to kinetic. Well, in my wish list would be for the Iranian people to get the outside help that they need in order to overthrow the regime and to really change the trajectory of the Middle East for their country and for everybody else. That's number one. Number two would be for the US and Israel to say, enough's enough. You, the Iranian regime, we've had enough with your nonsense, your hardballing, all your bravado and macho tweets. And we're now going to put down the foot and we're going back to fighting. And what are we going to serve? We are going to strike the infrastructure that supports the IRGC's ability to wage war. So transport, electricity, communications, water, etc. And that'll be very painful. That's a second option. What I think we're looking at, based on President Trump's posture, based on the diplomatic activity, based on the fact that today the Iranians reportedly returned their response to the American offer, and we're still waiting to see if that is really so and what was their answer. Based on that, I think we should anticipate another week of slow balling and another week where the Iranian regime will hope that their strategy of having international media do their bidding for them will amount to enough pressure on President Trump to accept a deal that is good enough for the Iranians, which means that the regime stays in place and where they have some semblance of a continuation of their nuclear weapons program, and question mark about Hormuz. I think that would be a bad situation, but I think that's a possibility. And region, closer to home to Israel, I think we're looking at more days and weeks of fighting in southern Lebanon between the IDF and Hezbollah. Whenever the IDF will see some kind of special opportunity, like what we did last week when Israel took out the relatively newly appointed commander of the Radwan forces, an important senior in Hezbollah. He was eliminated in a safe house in Beirut, by the way, hiding next to a school in the Dahya area in southern Beirut, but he was eliminated very successfully, and Israel will probably try to look for continued opportunities to degrade Hezbollah, but continued instability, continued fighting there, even though on paper in the Persian Gulf and in Lebanon we have ceasefires, but reality is very far from it.
Lots of talk about tension between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. Do you put any stock in that?
No. And I never have, and I think it's a classic example of people with opinions who are masquerading as journalists, who are projecting their hopes and beliefs and infusing them into the news cycle and bloodstream. I've seen it reported so many times in Israeli media of certain political leanings, and in American media, daylight here, daylight that, differences, scoldings, angry phone calls, J.D. Vance and Rubio and whatnot, and all of this, and anonymous leaks from the Pentagon that reportedly sustains these reports. But every time we've seen that, we've also seen it really rejected by reality, by President Trump in his actions. But I'll tell you one thing that I'm concerned about is that, there will be a certain time where the equation will also start to favor the current stalemate, which is basically now it's a game of chicken. Who's going to blink first? Who's going to scream first and blink first? And I think at a certain stage, there will be mounting pressure on the U.S. side as well. And I think it would be a shame to waste all of the military actions that have been done, all of the successes and achievements. And we shouldn't allow that to waste. And coming back full circle to how we started this conversation, I still have a lot of faith in this American president and this American administration.
Jonathan Conricus, thank you as always so much. Ever enlightening.
Thank you, Vivian.
And I really appreciated the sports metaphor, that rugby metaphor that you kind of strung out on Mother's Day. That was beautiful.
Well,
Sports
thank you.
metaphor.
Even though, maybe I should learn a bit more about football, but I played rugby myself, so it comes easier. And I recognize the fact that maybe many of our listeners don't follow rugby.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. But for those who do, the South Africans, maybe English, Scottish people, and the odd American who knows what real contact sport is about, rugby, without armor, then maybe this is enlightening.
Maybe my South African market will just kind of, explode
Maybe.
today. Who knows?
Maybe.
Thank you so much. As always, we'll be back to you
Thank you,
in
Vivian.
the near future for more. Recently, for the first time in almost 3 years, we Israelis have been able to sort of catch our breath for the first time since October 7th. I cannot remember a period when I could have done an interview like this one on a Sunday night and know in advance that I will not publish it for 2 days until Tuesday night and still be pretty confident that it'll still be relevant. The pace of events and life here has been beyond unrelenting. So this actually was a real treat for me to be able to do this in advance. Having said that, the news of President Trump's outright rejection of the Iranian response to America's ceasefire proposal, or cessation of the war proposal, did come in after Conricus and I did the interview. That was made public on Monday. So I've decided to close with this clip of Jonathan Conricus explaining in another media interview on Monday, yesterday, how he understands and analyzes the situation.
Yeah, the way I see it, there are three relatively reasonable options left. One, as a result of the Iranian refusal to the American proposal, is to apply more pressure. More pressure could mean more economic pressure. It could also very likely mean to go back to kinetic activity and to start attacking all of the national infrastructure in Iran that supports the Iranian regime's ability to continue to fight. That's one option. The tools are in place. The American assets are in the region. The military capabilities are there. The target banks are ready. And I assume that the planes are fueled up and everything is locked and loaded and ready to go. So the military option is very much on the table. I think President Trump, he's a bit hesitant to use it because he doesn't want to escalate the situation far beyond what it's already become. But the military...
And now, dear listeners, you are current. Thanks, as always, for being here. I know I have sent a lot of podcast material your way in recent days. It's just how things worked out in terms of timing. It's always a balance between the longer-term projects, like explosive Jew hatred in Canada, and staying on top of the big developments in the Middle East. I wish I could, but in spite of being told that I control the global financial system and media, I actually do not. I am living proof of the reality that we Jews do not control the world. So, when issues converge, I try to deliver. No more podcasts this week, I promise, but some great ones are coming soon. In the meantime, you know the drill. If you have not already supported our work with a premium paid subscription, please consider doing so today. It is important. Without your support, we simply cannot do the work. You can subscribe online at our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or make a contribution to Buy Me a Coffee. Heads up, our 4th anniversary since launch, amazingly, is coming up soon, like really soon. And in commemoration, we are going to reintroduce the limited access to our content for non-premium subscribers. I'd love to keep the gates open to all, but it is not a sustainable model. So I do hope that many of you express your appreciation for our work by taking out a paid subscription. For anyone lacking the means to support us financially, please send me a note. Vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. In the meantime, thanks for being here. Until next time, stay safe. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to Vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. That's VIVIAN@stateoftelaviv.com. And if you go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, you can find the subscribe button and take it from there. Hope that you do that. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything. Thank you, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team, and thank you, listeners, for being here. Until next time, stay safe.